Welcome to Oldtime Central.
Thank you, Ben.
First question is always, how did you get into playing old time?
I got into it about 9 years ago when I was living in New Haven, Connecticut, and essentially because of my friendship at the time with Brian Slattery at the time, not to suggest that we're no longer friends, we're definitely still friends. I met Brian through other musical projects, and then we got to talk more about old time, and I became interested in it. And then there was this sort of fateful moment when we were like, hey, well, we should try this out. Let's see what it's all about. And I'd never played it before, and also at that time, I didn't play fiddle or anything like that. It was just a cello player.
But he was playing old time.
Yeah. I mean, he's been playing ever since he was a teenager or before. And so he invited Harry Bullock over because they'd been playing together for years as well. And we got together, sat in my living room, my apartment, and bashed through some tunes. And looking back, fortunately, I don't have any real distinct memories of it because it would probably be really depressing. But I was just. Again, had no idea what to do with the bow, so I was just plucking some little bass lines, and it was fun for me. For them, it was intriguing perhaps, but also like pulling teeth because I did not know what I was doing, timing, totally wrong. But it was fun enough that I got the bug, and it didn't take too long before I was digging into it a lot more.
But there's a pretty healthy scene going on there at the time, wasn't there?
Yeah, New Haven's always had a good. There's always been a number of strong, steady players there, and then there's a lot of people moving in and out. Myself included, and then there's always people. There's always going to be students associated with Yale who come in and out, and the whole, in my experience, anyways, even though I was only there for a few years, that the New England scene in particular, the sort of Western Massachusetts, Connecticut crowd, they're all close enough to each other to do a lot of cross-pollinating, and there's a lot of sessions, a lot of players.
You mean people travel around a lot and do different stuff?
Yeah, both when I was living there and then going back and either sessions or having gigs and stuff like that. It's not uncommon in my experience to have people get in the car, drive 1 or 2 hours to play tunes for an evening and still go home that same day.
Right. And what were you doing at the time?
I was there. I'd moved to New Haven right after I finished grad school, because I was dating someone who was going to Yale, and otherwise, why would someone show up in New Haven? Nothing against New Haven. I came to really love the city, but it's not a place that has any particular known gravity. Once you're there, you recognize there's a lot of cool stuff going on, but rare is the person who would somehow be drawn to New Haven who's not from the area originally or somehow associated with one of the universities there. So yeah, it was my first place post school living and working.
But you were playing music most of the time, right?
Yeah. I was teaching a lot, and also working as a choir director and fake organist at a church, and playing. It was an interesting 3 years, to say the very least.
But you studied, what kind of music did you study in grad school?
I did, so in grad school in Maryland, I was doing classical cello, modern cello.
Okay.
And then when I came here to Germany, that's when I studied early music stuff.
Right. So the old time actually came before early music.
Well, officially, at least in terms of what I've studied, I got into early music in my master's in the States. That's when I picked up. That's when I first started playing viola da gamba when I was there. So I was already sort of into it, but I hadn't yet dove into a program of study or anything like that.
And do you think are there reasons why old time and what do we even call it in English? Alte Musik.
Alte Musik, early music. Yeah.
Early music. Is it apparent to you why they might be attractive to the same person?
Yeah, actually, I've thought about it a lot. I haven't. I should say I used to think about it quite a lot because I found for myself, like after doing bachelor and masters in classical music, I finished, and even while studying, but in particular after, like, I didn't feel particularly drawn to the classical world at all. Not because I disliked the music or anything like that.
Right.
It was just like, okay, I didn't feel like that fit my personality and skill set necessarily. And so it would have been like, okay, I'm just going to be struggling the whole time to do something that doesn't feel quite like me, just to try and earn money. That doesn't seem like the reason you should make music a career.
Right. What were the things there that you think were a bad fit?
It's hard
or
to
because
say.
the other way around. What was it in
Well,
early music that was?
Yeah,
was
I think
more
by
attractive?
answering the other question makes the other part make more sense. Like, because I found afterwards, I found myself getting into early music, traditional music in general, and that's what kind of drew me to Oldtime, because I was interested in all sorts of different folk traditions from different places. And then the other thing that I got into quite heavily right upon moving to New Haven was the world of free improvisation and avant-garde music and sort of experimental jazz and stuff like that. Also, I was into new music a lot in graduate school, and still did some of that, which has a lot of crossover with the improv stuff as well. So I found myself in these three sort of musical streams, which on the surface didn't seem to have anything to do with one another, but they felt like they belonged together for me somehow. I wasn't sure if that was just my personality or whatever, but there's no shortage of musicians who are also into those areas, which is essentially, on one hand, it's kind of all music that doesn't sit within the 1750 to 1920 framework.
Right.
It's classical music, as we generally think of it, is it's just a tiny drop in the bucket. Historically, it's nothing.
Right.
And it's, chronologically, historically, it's very, very short. Also, geographically, it's just like this little speck.
Right.
Yet we exalt it as like the greatest form of human created art or whatever. But so I was like, okay, why does it seem like there's other people who are also into like all the outliers, all the things that lie outside the canon, so to speak? And the best explanation I came up with, at first anyways, was that these other ways of making music are all these other genres are all very social in nature. Not necessarily, partly social in the sense, if you think of a jam, obviously that's a very social thing. There's no audience. It's about being together with people. But also the way the music is made is, for me, very very social or very interactive, and in a sense non-hierarchical. There's certainly roles that are distinct roles that you have to play in order for the music to function well. But like, if you're talking about improvised music, then obviously listening to one another is the only way to make it in any way effective or interesting.
Right.
And folk music of various kinds, being from the oral tradition, is very much about paying attention to and listening to someone else, and then of course in context. We all know what a good jam feels like. It's when people are paying attention to each other and fitting the pieces together in a nice way, as opposed to just sort of closing their eyes and barreling ahead. Right. And early music, maybe it's less obvious on the surface, but
it's also very improvisational.
It certainly can be. Yeah.
Isn't that right? My understanding is that there are basic structures to everything, but there is also a toolbox of improvisational tools or decorative tools, or whatever you want to call them. I don't know what the terminology for it is, but and your job is to learn to use them well as an individual based on the whatever musical situation is happening at that moment.
And that's I think the improvisational element of early music, it definitely plays a role in making it fit with these other things as well. I do find it, actually, the more I've done it in the last years, the more I feel slightly less convinced of that fact, only because like the strictures that inform how you improvise are so much are a bit more rigid than, I mean, if you compare it to free improvisation, obviously there's essentially no, I mean, you get to decide basically in the world of improvised music
Right.
how many, if any, borders and structures, rules that there are. I mean, to really improvise well in the world of early music is, from my perspective, even more difficult than jazz improvisation with changes or something like that. Because then, okay, you've got your chord structure and different things, but there's a lot of room. There's room to make a mistake into something musically interesting, and like if you're improvising in a say early Baroque style or something like that, you can't, like, you really need to know what you're doing, because if you make a mistake, it's going to stick out like a sore thumb and it's going to be really wrong.
Right.
So in that sense, the language that you have to learn is I think way more complex.
But it's kind of, I mean, I was thinking of bluegrasses. I mean, bluegrass also can be improvisational, people taking solos, but it also is more prescribed. Like there's I mean, and in fact, there's a set of acceptable variations, and you can put them together in a way that makes sense to you, but you can't, if you go outside of that acceptable set of variations, then people are going to call it something else, right? They're going to call it newgrass, or they're going to call it, it's no longer part of the genre.
Sure, yeah.
So it sort of seems like there's a spectrum of, even in the improvisation world, between you can more to sort of do whatever you want as long as you can make it sound good, towards at the other end, being like, well, there's kind of a set of improvisational tropes, I guess, and you have to use them, and if you don't use them, then you're outside of it.
Yeah, and that would certainly hold true for early music. I mean, in a positive sense. I mean, if you can use the language well, if you can use the tropes well, it's gonna sound amazing. Right. And if not, you're just going to sound like you're floundering and trying somehow, or it's going to sound like you're taking your modern sensibilities and imposing them on a system that does not fit those harmonic or melodic ideas. I mean, even like one of the things I always find fascinating is for the viola da gamba, for example, like one of the first treatises that's out there. From Diego Ortiz about how to play the instrument. Like a huge section of this book is just tons and tons and tons of variations on how to end a musical phrase. So it's like a cadence, in other words, just like playing D and then G, end of the phrase. Right. And he just goes through all these different ways that you can get to that last point. And they're minute, I mean, it's going to be, example 1A, and example 1B are only different by one or two notes. Yeah, but
that's what jazz musicians. I mean, a lot of bebop musicians certainly, or straight ahead to. They also have libraries full of 1,000 variations on exactly the same. On exactly the same thing.
Yeah.
Huh. So do you, in the classical world, it seems like there's both a hierarchy within the orchestra, right, where the musician, not all of the musicians are on the same level, right, because they're chairs, and there's a conductor, and there's a score that has like the notes written that you're supposed to play, right? And then there's also I also find it difficult somehow to describe it. The curtain is more, somehow there's not really there's no real participation between the audience and the performers. Right, it's much more. Whereas even in early music, I feel like, and certainly in jazz or in free improvisation, I don't know how to describe that well, but it's somehow the audience is more of a participant than in classical music.
I mean, it might have as much to do with scale as anything else. I'm just thinking out loud, but like if you're playing in an 80-person symphony orchestra, like it's really important that you do your job that you're given and do it well, and not deviate from that. And to that end, like, you need to stay focused on the conductor, or at least the ensemble as a whole. If you try and start like vibing with the audience or something like that, things are gonna fall apart. So it could just be that, you know.
But you know, I have the picture of like the one viola player who's like in the back there totally vibing with the audience.
God, yeah, it wouldn't work, right? Because you have to sort of sacrifice your personality a little bit, which is actually what I mean. I like that part about classical music. Actually, I don't see any reason to see that as a negative. Like, I mean, okay, we all know full well there's plenty of egos in the classical world, but like if you're playing in an orchestra, like a really good orchestra in particular, like you need to hang up your ego and your personal vendettas and whatever before you go out on that stage, because you're not there to be an amazing solitary player. You're there to be like one piece of a larger important whole, which I find, interestingly enough, a weird analog to. Recently, last year or two, I've done played a lot more pop music, and there's this great, misconception in particular the classical world, but in a lot of musical circles, that pop music is either lazy and just about production and image, or specifically on just a musical level, that it's like this kind of free, easy thing, and like it doesn't, you can play it this way, you can play it that way. By the way, nothing could be further from the truth. That's what I really like about, especially playing pop music in a context like I play it in a sort of a big band context regularly, and like you have a job, and like the precision, like if you want that music to pop, if you want it to really sound good, if you want it to like make butts wiggle, like you have to pay so much attention, and the fun of it is in reproducing it the same each time. Right. And I don't find that, to be honest, boring at all. Like that's a heck of a lot more difficult than doing a lot of other stuff. Right. Yeah. That note needs to even if you have in 16 bars, all you do is play like on the one every measure, but like that note has to have the same exact beginning each time, needs to end exactly this point. Right. And you can tell, like, if you do it perfectly, it rocks. Like it really works. And if you do it in a kind of lazy, flippant way, like it's all there, all the information is there where it's essentially supposed to be, but no one's going to be inspired by it. Right. It doesn't work actually.
interested why you can and do play lots of music. Why do you keep spending time playing old time?
That's a good question. The music appealed to me, for what it is as a sounding genre in the first place, and that's never gone away. So like I like how it sounds, and I like how it feels to play it. I mean, those sort of basic things about the music haven't changed at all. Since I've come over here, it's maybe it's interesting because it's much harder to find really like killer sessions and like the opportunity to play tunes at a really high level or just in a really like sort of personally meaningful or deep kind of way. That's harder to come by not living in the U.S. Obviously, that's just
right.
just
by
the numbers. So
it's not the water.
No, I don't think so. Well, the water's better probably. And so in that, then another. Okay, well, the reason I say that is like in some sense another element takes over, which is, there was, I'm from Pennsylvania. I'm not from a region where old time music really has any direct and long historical tradition. I mean, of course, there's Pennsylvania fiddle music, but it's not something that would really put squarely in the old time world. I don't have any family connection to it or anything like that. So it's not like if I'm back in the States, my interest in the music is simply musical and personal, and it's not like I'm a tradition bearer or anything like that.
Right.
I'd never claim that either. But then this thing happens when you move to another country where, in some sense, like it or not, if you're playing traditional music from your home country, even if within the context of your country you're not really technically someone who can be called a direct continuer of the tradition or anything like that, here you're kind of thrown into that role automatically,
right,
whether you want it or not. So I guess in a somewhat involuntary way I found myself feeling, because I wanted to continue to play the music, and surely there's also things wrapped up in that of like being somewhere else but wanting to somehow stay close to your home, close to your roots or something like that. It became important in a different way to play the music and I felt like somewhat in the role of ambassador, only on a local level, of course.
Sure.
I mean, not like someone who's traveling around the continent,
sure,
preaching about old time, but and then that was interesting. Like I have mixed feelings about feeling in that position sometimes, but it certainly provided definitely some sort of push and energy to keep going with the music, and made it also important in a different way than maybe it wasn't so directly important living in the States. Right.
Because if you're living in the States, then you're an American in America.
Mm-hmm.
And so there's no particular need for the music doesn't play in it. Well, I think it still does actually for lots of people play some sort of additional role with linking with a sort of imagined identity that they don't currently have.
Well, in the States, if I'm playing music there, I mean, I'm a northerner playing southern music, or you can get, of course, even deeper with that. I'm a white northerner playing music that was derived from African traditions and was taken from slaves, and that was mixed with Scots or whatever. Like the whole history of it, like the whole history of the music in the U.S. or as it got to the U.S. and then formed and grew and developed there. Still I'm not any direct product of that there whatsoever. So I'm always, in that sense, a bit of an outsider. But like, it's like so many things, right? Like from, Christianity is a good example of it. Like, you might be, within, maybe you're Catholic or you're Protestant or you're an Anabaptist or something like that, or get even deeper, and like, are you a Methodist or are you a Lutheran, and within those worlds it gets smaller and smaller within each of those worlds, like Russian nesting dolls, like
right.
then the differences are really important in that world, and to anyone outside of it, they'll be like, are you a Christian? They'll be like, well, yes, I'm a Lutheran. They'll be like, what?
Right.
It doesn't mean anything,
Right.
And it doesn't have to mean anything to them either. It's like here, it's like, oh, so you play, we all, anyone who's here playing old time music knows that, like,
how much the Germans love Irish music.
Exactly. Yeah. And okay, if they say Irish, you correct them, but like I've completely stopped making any distinctions, at least on a surface level here, with people who they ask what you play, and you're like, sometimes you call it bluegrass, sometimes you call it country, sometimes you call it old time, sometimes you call it folk, whatever. Like, given the opportunity, you can explain it to them, but no one really cares.
Right.
Like, from outside, like you don't have any kind of schema in place to categorize the music in a more detailed or defined way. So I'm just an American in Germany playing country-ish music,
right.
And that's cool. Like,
right.
given the opportunity, I'd liked very much to tell people more about what it is, and then go even further maybe and be like, and here's why, like, I don't call myself a bearer of this tradition in a way that someone from Kentucky or something like that would. But you don't, to get to that point of like, of fine detail, you don't get to that point with
right.
most people, and which is to be expected. I mean, come on,
yeah.
There's only so much time in a day.
And you've started a little session and community of old-time players in Cologne.
Mm-hmm.
How's that going? What kind of people show up there, and like?
But yeah, we've got a regular group that's probably mixed. It's actually not. I'm not sure why this is the case. It's fairly expat heavy. Not really people. There's not that many people from the States involved. I also don't know that many people from the States who live there. But there's a couple Brits, Canadians, stuff like that who come, and then some Germans as well. There's nothing particularly groundbreaking about it. We get together once a month on a Monday and hack through as many tunes as we can before we have to leave.
And how do the rest of the Coleners receive it? Does it fit well with the sort of? As a Berliner, I don't really know anything about Cologne except that the 10 Kölsch that I drank when I was there once.
Right.
But like,
right.
The reputation is of a sort of fun-loving, more communal.
Yeah, it does have that reputation.
Sort of party culture.
I don't know. I think most of the time people just don't quite get what's going on. I don't feel like I've ever been met with hostility or anything like that.
Right.
And more often than not, it's definitely the kind of thing where people just do not know what it is.
Right.
And so they don't know that they kind of enjoy it until they're subjected to it. And then, and then they get into it and they find it fun. And there's somewhere in everyone's mind over here there's this trope of the hillbilly,
right.
Which is generally like a kind of which is a trope you would like to correct more often than not, but again,
in the States as much as here.
Yeah, and it's the opportunity does not always present itself, and you know what it's like trying to argue with people here about anything that might fall into the identity politics spectrum.
Sure.
Just make sure you have about 6 hours of time on your hand. But that's another subject.
Right.
But all that to say, like, it's more than tolerated. Let's put it that way.
Yeah.
I think that people are. We did some square dances. That really went well. People definitely get into that. I think people are also generally, there is a sort of fascination that happens because the idea of making music just because it's fun, and actually like handmade music, not listening to music. So, Cologne's famous for Carnival, which is, this big giant. So people love to party, and the music plays a big role in it. And Carnival music is the absolute worst music on the play. It's so bad. It's so incredibly bad. There's older stuff that's okay, but the new stuff, it's so incredibly bad. But it brings people together. They love to sing and get drunk and like sing these terrible songs and puke on each other and all kinds of stuff. But the thing of making the music yourself, that's really like people get confused sometimes. Like if you try and go into a bar and play tunes, at first you're met with just confused looks a lot of the time. And then people are kind of like, then sort of the scales fall off, and people are like sort of shaken out of some dream state, and have a hard time figuring out at first, and then they're totally into it. And the square dance is the same thing. Oftentimes you feel the sense of like, oh man, you're doing something community oriented and sort of amateurish, but totally loose and free and fun, and like we want that looseness, we want that freedom, because it's not built into the culture necessarily. Right. So they're fascinated by that for sure. Right. But for that very reason, it's hard to make it really stick, because it's
sort of contrary to the cultural norms.
Yeah. I mean, people like to have something a little more concrete to hold on to, or something that can, some way of figuring out where they exist skill-wise in this system.
Right,
and
right.
Like, can I participate now, or do I have to wait until I know more? And this idea of just do it, man. Like that's
It's not a very German thing to do. Right. Last question: What are you excited about musically right now? What are you into and having fun with?
Well, there's there's a lot of stuff, but to keep it sort of old-timey focused, one project, the string quartet, the Idemea Quartet, we call ourselves. That
who's in that again?
Jane Rothfield and Ewan MacDonald, who's a friend of mine from England, Scottish guy living in England, and Becca Wolf, who's English, lives in Greece actually. And I'd been thinking for a long time, I had interest in putting old time in a string quartet format to see what happens. And we did this sort of informally maybe 2 years ago, and slowly we've been working on stuff, and we made a recording that's soon going to be mixed and finished, and have some gigs coming up. So that's been really fun. It's nice to see.
The record's coming out.
Yeah.
When?
Yeah. Sometime in the coming months. I'm not sure exactly when, but it's almost done being mixed. And we have some gigs in end of June. I don't know if we'll have it done by then or not, but it'll be sometime
in the UK or
another in some in Germany, some in Holland.
Okay.
So that project has developed in many ways that I didn't anticipate. Like I think when I was thinking about the string quartet thing in Old Time, I had something more, I don't want to say classical in mind. I think I had something, my sort of brainstorming about that leaned more towards the chamber music aesthetic, and then it's because of the specific four personalities involved. Right. It's become its own thing, obviously, and so it has some of that, but it has other elements that are great and unexpected. But really, I mean, the recording sounds great, and it's really, it's fun for me. I never felt totally comfortable like professionalizing old time music too much, partly because of what we talked about a little bit before earlier, with not really feeling like it's appropriate for me to call myself any kind of tradition bearer or something like that, because it's not really directly my tradition, and so it feels good to me to be doing something, taking music that I really care about a lot.
Right.
And when I say old time in this context, it really means more Appalachian tradition writ large, because it's as much ballads and other stuff as it is just straight up fiddle tunes. So yeah, I'm really excited about that, and it feels like something I can really dive into without having to dive into in a sort of professional sense, without having to be worried too much about whether the border between folk tradition and being a working musician I find that a tricky border sometimes to
Right.
deal with, and this helps that, and it's musically really super interesting.
Okay.
I have there's an idea percolating for another project that's percolating. We actually have to make something happen with it because we have a gig in July. It's sort of one of those things where someone who organized
get the book contract first, and then you have to write it.
God, it doesn't happen very often, but a friend who runs a festival in Cologne had seen this sort of one-off band I did before, which was kind of mixing like free jazz and old time, and it was quite zany and weird and sort of theatrical. And so he wanted that. That band doesn't really exist anymore, but I've kind of changed up the personnel, and I have some. Again, it's the similar thing of like taking the music that I really like, but wanting to do something totally different with it. The music more is just sort of the source material, not in any way at all trying to pretend like this is really old time music. It's just kind of like the source, whatever.
Right. So
if I get my act together and
someone else termed it old time inspired music.
Very good. So we'll see. If I get my act together, that could be really cool, or I won't.
Or it'll be crazy.
Yeah, it'll definitely be crazy in one form or another.
Cool. All right. Should we play a couple tunes?
Let's do it.
And make sure that we don't mix anything in there, and I'll make sure not to pay you anything for them.
Sure.
Yeah. Okay. Sounds good. Wink the other eye.